So if you start towards the left where the little person is with the light bulb, in the first session, we spoke about organizational culture in tech, what it is and what it's not. And if you then follow the little trail there to the next 3 sessions just before the number 2, today we'll be talking about models of organizational culture. So getting into a little bit more of the specifics, whereas in the previous session, we did the basics of what organizational culture is and what it is not. So just to quickly recap, maybe for the sake of the attendees who weren't in the first session, we said that organizational culture, there's many different definitions, but for the sake of this series, organizational culture is a system of shared beliefs that give meaning to social interactions within organizational life. So it's not team building days or your uniform or the way you speak to each other or the type of meetings that you have. These are all just superficial or the top level of organizational culture that we can actually see, hear, and touch. We'll get into that model a little bit later, but it's about creating meaning to our experiences in organizational life. It is multi-leveled. It affects all areas of organizational life. And then also more specifically, why it is important for tech organizations. It's because organizational culture affects new ventures' ability to internationalize, so scaling up internationally. It's also been shown to assist with inter-firm and intra-firm collaboration. So a focus in the modern business world is we don't just know organization is an island. We have to be able to collaborate both internally and externally with partners to survive, to grow innovation, and then employee motivation as well. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what we discussed in the previous session. And today we will be focusing on perspectives and models. So because I don't have you in front of me, but I like interaction, I am going to ask you to, on a separate tab, if you are if you are engaging in the Zoom call on the browser, please open a separate tab to menti.com and then enter that code that you see there, and please keep that open. You can also open it on your phone. So just go to menti.com and fill in that code. And then I'm going to ask you to on that separate tab, please tell me if you think organizational culture is like a pizza with different slices, or if it's an iceberg. Which of these 2 metaphors can we use, do you think we can use to look at organizational culture? Okay, so we've got one iceberg, got a pizza, okay, so the pizza is gaining on the iceberg. Okay, is that it? Nobody else wants to try and, okay, so we've got one more iceberg. Pizza's bringing up the rear, and it looks like the iceberg is in the lead. 5 more seconds. Anybody else wants to vote? Okay, so it looks like the majority or more people are saying that when we examine organizational culture, we need to consider it as an iceberg as opposed to a pizza. So the correct answer is, it's a trick question, it's both, depending on which model you use. So the first 2 models that are quite well known, quite frequently referenced when we talk about organizational culture are the first two that you can see here on the slide, Hofstede's and the Globe framework, especially when you talk about diversity and international firms and culture. A framework that's very, very frequently used is the Globe framework. The reason I have both of these frameworks up here is for anyone who maybe does work in the area of organizational studies, culture, these type of things. I am aware that there's quite a bit of debate around these two, which one has the most construct validity, which one is the most accurate. That's not within the scope of this session. What I just would like to illustrate with these two is how they work is they pretty much have a pizza approach to organizational culture. And especially the Globe project framework, it says that depending on which national cultural context you are in, your organizational culture will be congruent to that national culture. And so both Hofstede's and the Globe framework have various dimensions. Some of them overlap, some of them are the same, and then Globe has a lot more dimensions, so more slices to the pizza. So both of them, for example, have power distance. Hofstede's one has a masculinity/femininity dimension, whereas the Globe framework has a gender egalitarianism dimension, excuse me. And so what these frameworks say is that, say, for instance, you are in an organization within Northern America, there will probably be a low power distance, meaning that people are generally in the West, they are encouraged to speak out, engage with leadership if they feel something is wrong or something that they don't agree with. Challenging leadership isn't often frowned upon. Whereas if you're, say, in the Middle East, I've spent some time working in the Middle East as well, there will be a much higher power distance. So because of the actual national culture, so the social culture within those countries, the organizational cultures that are embedded into those social structures will then mimic or be congruent to those cultures. So essentially, you can map out cultures like I'm showing here in this diagram. This is just an example. So on the outside, you can see, I'm not sure which one I use here. How many dimensions? I think this is the Globe one. But regardless, both Hofstede and Globe frameworks say that if you want to examine an organization's culture, you can have a survey be completed by people in that organization. And this will typically be the same as most other organizations within that culture. And so you can see a culture is either the green line or the orange line. Now, Shine's framework is somewhat different in that it focuses on the internal dynamics within an organization, as opposed to the other two frameworks that look at the social context. So Shine's position, or Shine's framework, says that the frameworks that use the national culture, there can be so many different combinations that that framework actually isn't very useful, because there's just too many different possibilities that it can be. I mean, if you look at the example diagram there, that could be any number of different, it's an infinite number of combinations. And so that doesn't really help us when we want to examine our organizational culture in one specific organization. This framework is useful when we're talking about a culture nationally or geographically, regionally, But if we really want to look at one specific organization, even though it is situated in the same social context as another one, it won't necessarily be congruent or be the same as national culture. So Shine's perspective on the matter is that if we want to examine or develop or work on our organizational culture, we should use the metaphor of a pyramid. And so what this pyramid structure posits is that what we see at the very top, the smallest triangle at the top, those are the things that we can actually see and touch that relate to our organizational culture. So the symbols, or as he calls it, Shine calls it the cultural artifacts. So these are things like our uniforms, our slogan, our way that we advertise job positions, the way that we work as a group, the types of engagement, all these things that we can see and touch. Those are the artifacts, but that's just a representation of the culture. As I mentioned in the recap, organizational culture is more than just this. Organizational culture is how we see ourselves in organization life and how we make sense to all of these different interactions that we experience within an organization. So these artifacts only represent the other things that are in the other levels of this pyramid. So the middle one that underpins these artifacts that we can actually see are now things that we can't see anymore, but it does affect the way that we make sense and make meaning of our organizational life, are our values. So what values do we have as an organization? And how do these values then materialize into artifacts? And then the very bottom one is our underlying assumptions. So how do we see the world? What are our assumptions about the world? What does it mean to be part of this organization? How do we see this organization as part of a greater society? And so you can already see when you compare these two frameworks, or these perspectives rather, when you compare these perspectives to each other, they are significantly different in how they can be practically applied. So when I recommend, when I work with organizations and organizational culture, is I use Shine's framework, just because it lends itself more to application to a specific organization. And it also, I think in a very user-friendly way, illustrates how we can't just work on the surface. You can have a brilliant slogan and have team building sessions at the end of every week and go for dinner and all of these nice things. But if we don't also look at our values that underpin all of these artifacts or these symbols, and also how we see the world, how we see ourselves within the organization and the organization within the greater society, then those artifacts are either going to be useless, they're not going to contribute to us making meaning to the world around us in the world of work, or they're not going to do anything. You're going to spend maybe a lot of money, a lot of effort in training, in rebranding, all of these nice things. And if we don't look at what underpins those artifacts, they effectively will become useless. Okay, so now we have another mentee. So as I said, the first one was a trick question. I set up this a while ago, so I'm not sure if the next one is a trick question as well. Probably not. Let's look at the next one. Next question is, which of the following should we consider when evaluating our organization's culture? And there's 6 options. So it's structure, business processes, industry factors, legislation, group dynamics, and policy. And I think you should have the option to select various options. Ooh, I can see a trend. Okay, so it looks like business processes and group dynamics are leading with 4. Everyone else has, okay, so now we're starting to differentiate. Okay. So it looks like group dynamics are in the lead. Oh, and organizational structure is in the lead as well. Legislation is behind, looks like. Okay, is that it? Anyone else want to try? So it looks like we're saying, excuse me, organizational culture is a product or should be considered from the perspective of how we structure our organizational structure and group dynamics, and not so much legislation, some policy, some market factors. Okay, so this is kind of a trick question. So all of these are applicable, actually. However, they are applicable based on your specific organizational, your business environment. So where my first question was, is organizational culture like a pizza with different slices that you consider, that you look at? So that would be a Hofstede globe kind of an approach. Or is it like an iceberg that you only see the top part, but the bottom also has an influence? So there's an option that you can choose. Do I want to look at organizational culture as a pizza, or do I want to look at it as an iceberg? That's your choice. However, this question I pose is because it's a trick question in the sense that all of this applies, but this is not because of your own, oh, there we go. That's cheating, I already gave you the answer. So this is less to do with the framework that you choose to use and more to do with your actual business environment. So depending on your business environment and what issues are salient for you or your organization rather, these different aspects will apply. So let's look at what that looks like. Okay, so we've got more. So what's in the front? Looks like group dynamics. Group dynamics, structure, and process seem to be leading. Okay, so let's look at what that actually means. So there are different perspectives. So you can look at it as a pizza or an iceberg. But now, if I actually want to measure and examine my organizational culture, there's various models that we can use to do that. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's loads and loads and loads. But the 3 models that I'll be discussing here today, I find are very useful in terms of their practical application, very user-friendly and easy to understand. So the 3 that I will be discussing is Quinn and Cameron's competing values framework. It's the one on the left. Spencer Stewart's styles of organization, of company culture, and then Thiel's company culture matrix. So the first one is Quinn and Cameron. Actually, I think that's the wrong way around. I think it's Cameron and Quinn. Apologies for that, but it's the same people. So the way that this model works is it looks at, well, actually, excuse me, all 3 models have 2 dimensions. And then based on where your organization falls within those dimensions determines your organizational culture. So with Cameron and Quinn's competing values, the competing values are twofold. So first of all, do my business environment require flexibility, or does my business environment require stability? So that's the one set of competing values. And then the next set of competing values is, do I have an internal focus or do I have an external focus? So some of you might feel, well, that's not really competing values because you can have both. I think to a certain extent, you can have a balance between flexibility and stability, and you can have a balance between internal and external factors. But from what I found was that, yes, balance is always the name of the game. Balance is always good. But if you try to achieve both, if you're, spending time and money on training and rebranding and facilitating some types of interactions between your people to facilitate both flexibility and stability and both internal and external focus, you end up achieving neither. So if you're using this, if you want to, no, let's do it the other way around. You don't want to use this model. You have to ask yourself the question, is my business environment of such a nature that I need to look at stability versus flexibility? And by stability and flexibility, I'm referring to changes to how you do business operations. So if you're a startup, you typically need a lot of flexibility. Your business environment will be one that is fluid, that is constantly changing. Or if you are an organization that, for example, works with, say, money and transactions, and there needs to be a high level of accuracy, your industry is highly regulated, then your business environment is typically more stable. Same with external, internal factors. So internal factors is looking at what we do internally, how we develop, how we grow, how we promote cooperation. That will, again, typically for a startup, when you have to build your capacity and make sure that you have a talent pipeline for the growth, there will typically be a lot of internal focus, whereas with other organizations that maybe are more focused on market share and things like that, there will be an external focus. You have to ask yourself, does my business environment require consideration for structure, so flexible or stable, and internal versus external factors? Then Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework will be useful. So now when you have an estimation, and a little bit later on we'll get to how you determine actually where on this plane you fall, you can then either adopt a clan type of organizational culture, where you should then focus your interventions, so your training and your branding and all of these things, on creating a sense of family, mentoring, nurturing. Same with all the other ones. If you're adhocracy, focus on people being dynamic, entrepreneurial, taking risks. And so each of these I can have a whole lecture on by itself, because there's various different ways in which you can develop your organizational culture for this. The other thing is also important. If you find yourself in a business environment that requires flexibility and an internal focus, and your business just simply is not a clan culture, you find that based on various factors that's unique to your business, you cannot establish a clan culture, it might be something else, that's not the end of the world. You can achieve a optimal, productive, efficient organizational culture without actually adopting a specific type of culture as labeled within these 4 quadrants. But you can put interventions in place that kind of offset the business environment for your specific organization. So say, for instance, you require flexibility, but your people are more inclined to be in a stable business environment. We're not going to fire all of our people and get people that can only work in a flexible work environment. There's different things that you can do as an organization to compensate for this misalignment. So, but the purpose for today is just to show you this is one of the models that you can use. So what now if you don't really have to look at flexibility and stability and where your focus lies? Then we can maybe look at a different model, which is Spencer Stewart's 8 styles. So where the previous one has 4 quadrants, this model has got 8 styles. And you'll see that the first, on the y-axis, we have the same components, which is stability versus flexibility. But instead of an internal or external focus, this dimension has got to do with independence versus interdependence. So again, you ask yourself the question, when I'm looking at examining my organizational culture, do I have a concern for how my people interact? So instead of looking at, okay, do I have to have an internal, external focus? Maybe, yes, my focus is completely internal. I don't even have to worry about an external focus. My focus is completely internal. Then this model might be more useful, because both independence and interdependence has got to do with internal functioning and how your employees work with each other. They either work independently or they collaborate a lot. So those are the two dimensions. So based on that, then you can also map out exactly what your business environment is, and then make sure that you implement interventions towards building and developing your organizational culture that is in line with your business environment. And so each of these 8 styles, so it essentially is the 4 quadrants, but with a little bit more nuance to it. So if you're, say, in this one, if you measure high on flexibility and high on external focus, then it would be in one quadrant. In this one, however, if you have high flexibility and high interdependence, but with a little bit more leaning towards flexibility and more of a focus on flexibility, you would have a purpose-driven culture. And if you have high flexibility and high interdependence, but more focused on a higher emphasis on the collaboration between people and working together, then you would have more of a caring organizational culture, or should have work towards build that would be more in line with your business environment. And again, each of these 8 different styles of company culture has got different facets to it, and would require different types of interventions should you want to develop that. And the same rule applies as with the previous one, where if your business environment dictates or suggests that you should have a certain style as indicated on this model, but it's just not practically possible, that doesn't mean you can't use this model, or that it's the end of the world, or you can't develop your organizational culture. It just means that you should maybe now consider things to offset and compensate for things that you can't just do based on measurements on this specific model. Maybe just quickly, I think stability and flexibility is quite obvious. But with independence and interdependence, maybe just to clarify what that means is, if the nature of your work, of your business environment is that you have maybe a lot of highly specialized individuals that whose work is professionally regulated, and people do kind of their own thing, then that's high independence. So lawyers, IT people, psychologists like myself, that doesn't mean we don't ever collaborate, but the focus would be on doing your own thing, whereas interdependence has got to do with more teamwork, collaboration. So is the nature of the work that people do more by themselves or as a group? And obviously there's no absolutes in business, especially when it comes to people. So it's definitely on a spectrum, but those are the 2 dimensions. And the third one is Thiel's company culture. So Peter Thiel is the guy who found, is it PayPal? I think it was PayPal. He's also the founder of Planeteer, I think. I don't think I'm saying that correctly, but anyway, so him and a guy by the name of Masters, they came up with the company culture matrix. And so this is very different from the other 2, as it doesn't look at flexibility and stability and then internal or external factors or how people engage. This model looks at rule structure, so policies, rules, regulation, and the level of trust. So this also has 4 quadrants. And so if you have a low rule structure, it means typically a new company, maybe you don't have all your formal policies in place yet, or you just don't have policies and you just wild west it. Or if you have a high rule structure, you would typically you will be in a very highly regulated environment. Again, maybe if I can use the example of financial services, very highly regulated. There's not really a lot of wiggle room. You have to follow specific rules. So high rule structure or low rule structure, and then trust. If there's a low trust or high trust, that impacts where you fall. And so the 4 quadrants is for a high rule structure, but low trust is totalitarianism. If you've got low both rules and trust, it's kind of a dog eat dog. Everyone is just out for themselves. If you don't have much rules, but you have a lot of trust, there's anarchy, which is the example that the authors use is a young Google. It's definitely not the case anymore. They're very much more structured now. And then the ideal culture, according to the authors, is if you have high rules, but also high trust. And this is also different from the other 2, where with the first 2 examples, the competing values and the 8 styles, within those you can develop any of the identified styles based on your business environment. But with this framework, the assumption is that we only actually want the one. We only want the ideal culture, and we want to work towards achieving that ideal culture. If our business environment results in any of the other 3, then that is not a very ideal, that's not a constructive organizational culture. We want to put in time and effort to achieve the ideal culture. So that's essentially what these models are for. They are tools to use to identify what is our business environment, what would be best for our organization, for our people, and how does that drive how we approach the development of our organizational culture. Okay, now we've got another Menti. I think this is the last one, actually. Where can I get information to measure my organizational culture? So we've looked at, you can view organizational culture as have different components, or as something that you can only see a part of. We've now seen that you get different models depending on your specific business environment. You can use different models to determine where should I focus my attention on development. Now, where do I get information to do that? Where do I get information to use these models that I've just shared with you? And so here you can use, this is a word cloud exercise. So any word or phrase, or there we go, a cross-sectional interview. Okay, support staff survey, yeah, good. Nobody else want to try? I've only got one person giving, oh, there we go, more performance reviews, surveys, staff surveys, yeah. Goodness, have we already been busy for 45 minutes? Okay, let's look at this. The pub. That must be from someone in the UK. It's very UK. I did my PhD in London, Queen Mary. So the pub sounds very UK-esque. Polls, HR department, conversation, adopting new software, leadership, intranet, yes. Slack, yeah, we've got Slack. The lunchroom, calibration meetings. Oh, I don't know what those are. Maybe someone can share with us what calibration meetings are. It sounds very exciting or interesting. Okay. Anyone else want to try? Levers, I'm assuming that means exit interviews. Yeah, exit interviews. It's not on my list, but now that you mention it, yes, definitely that can give us an estimation of our organizational culture. Okay, so shall we leave it at that? Cool. So I think for most of the input that you supplied in that word cloud, I think is applicable. The way you measure your organizational culture really has got to do with how much resources and time you have available. Because quite frankly, you can use all of those things that you mentioned. I don't even have all of those sources of information on my list, like the calibration meeting, the pub. I joked about the pub, but that's definitely an informal engagement in an informal setting. Definitely lunchroom pub can be a source of gauging organizational culture, which I don't even have on my list. My list is all just formal sources, but you can really gather information from a various number of sources. The key thing is that you know which model you're using and that you're collecting your data in a structured manner. So you know exactly what to look for so that it's not haphazard. And then that process will be dictated by the amount of resources and time you have available. So the three things that I mentioned that are sort of key areas that you can look at that will likely give you a lot of rich information regarding your organizational culture is looking at strategy, doing document analysis. So looking at what are the type of things that I set goals for, what is my relationship with my competitors, my industry, market trends. There you can identify that will typically be a qualitative analysis. So you look at patterns that emerge. You will look at topics and specific issues that are highlighted within strategy and documents. Then engagement and pulse surveys, quite a few mentioned surveys, exit interviews, polls, definitely. So that will be more of a quantitative analysis. You will set specific measures, specific items that you want to measure, and then write specific items to measure those. And then email, Slack, and even Glassdoor, you can get anonymous feedback from current employees, ex-employees. And so emails, I think Slack was also one of the things that one of you mentioned. You can get both qualitative and quantitative feedback on the nature and the current state of your organizational culture from those sources. So then if we're measuring our organizational culture, if we want to see what is the current situation and then develop a way forward, there's two things that we need to consider. If you look at the white panel on the left, at the bottom, those diagrams should look familiar to you, is we need to decide how are we looking at our organizational culture? Are we viewing it as something with a bunch of different facets? Or are we considering that we are only able to measure the top part of the iceberg, so the little blue triangle at the top of that pyramid, and then make inferences about our values and the way that we see organizations, so assumptions, the way that we see organizational life. Then if we've made a decision, if we are considering our organizational culture as a pizza or an iceberg, then we need to make a decision in terms of which model we want to use. Do we have to focus on stability, flexibility? Do we have to worry about external factors or internal factors? Are we considering policy versus trust? All of these things will then dictate which of the three models you should use. And then when you've made that decision, now we need to decide, okay, how are we collecting insights? How are we collecting data to measure where we are lying within each of those frameworks, in which quadrant or within which style? And then after we've done our data analysis, then we can put together a plan of action to develop our organizational culture by using information from strategy documents, surveys, all of these different areas that I've mentioned. So to try and assist with this process that I've just shown you this one, because there's a lot of things you need to consider first and then next and then next. We are at LBBC, we are beta testing a quick audit. So audit is maybe a bit of a stretch for some of you who've done actual audits. So it's a quick audit, but it is designed to assist with this process of deciding which framework should I use, which model should I use, how should I collect information. So if you want to try this out, this is still in the development phase, but we would love your input on it. If you complete this audit, it generates a report that's emailed to you that gives you an indication in terms of which model is most appropriate, what's your current state, and what would typically be the best way forward. So if you go to that link and just complete that, it's basically just a quick survey. It shouldn't take you too long. We will generate a report and send that to you. It's completely free because we're still beta testing, but that is open to you should you wish to use it. I think we can just do maybe I'll copy and paste it into the chat as well. And I think, yeah. So in the last session, I was asked if I can make any recommendations in terms of something to read up on, or books, or something that you can reference afterwards. And I didn't really have an answer because there's too many. So I decided I would add all of the references. So these are all the sources that I used to put this series together. So this is not just for today. This is for all 4 of the sessions. Well, 3 of them, because the last one will be completely practical and application. So if you would like to join us for the hackathon on the last session, I would really recommend you doing this survey here, or the quick audit, and then we can actually discuss the report afterwards or during the hackathon. I think that would be very useful for yourselves. I hope, and it will also help us to improve the tool based on your input. And so Celios already shared my contact details, but that's my contact details. And so that is my story for today. And I think if we still have some time, yeah, we still have a few minutes left for anyone who maybe wants to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Clif. That was very interesting, very enlightening. Definitely makes you think and reflect, at least makes me reflect on some of my experiences, recent and not so recent, working with different clients and organizations. Where's the clap emoji? Okay, here's the clap emoji. Claps for me.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, any input they'd like to share.
I do. Hi.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi. I thought this was really interesting, and I appreciate the time you took to parse through all the different models that people have used. And one of the ones that I use quite often is polarity theory, in terms of like, how do you leverage both to get the upsides that you need? And I was struck by how many of the models really are set up as either or, even as you were describing like the difference between a tech startup and, you know, a longer, you know, more mature company definitely need different amounts of structure or flexibility, but they all need both. And so I was wondering how you talk to clients about that it really isn't one or the other. And I'm sorry if you talked about that and I missed that piece, because the piece that I kept hearing was the either or. So I was just interested in how you framed that for folks.
Sure. So the way I frame it is I try to facilitate, so I'd facilitate a discussion where I get the client to discover what is most important to them. And I also make a point of saying that even though the frameworks that we use are set up as either or, it is on a spectrum, and I highlight the risks associated with trying to do both. So my approach is basically just discussing and getting the client to make a decision as to which one is the most important, and then ensure that our intervention doesn't necessarily neglect the part of the scale that is not maybe the most salient, but then focusing on the one that is the most important for that time. Maybe putting something together like a future timeline, so saying stability is really important now, but in a year's time, flexibility might be more important. So kind of putting maybe a timeline in place, prioritizing, and just being real with clients and say, listen, you can't have your cake and eat it. That's what I've found. I am quite interested to read up on polarity theory. I'm not familiar, but I will definitely give that a look. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ryan asks, will the deck and or recording be shared? Stelios, you want to speak on that?
Yeah, of course. We can simply send an email here. You can also get access. You can also get a free copy of my book, but we might also sharing the deck with everyone who participated.
Yeah, sure.
And also please make sure that to join the next event, I'm going to share them again. Please make sure to register.
Yeah, so maybe
Stewart, can I just say, I put a couple of questions in the chat, but I think they've just got lost completely. I asked if the models that you were presenting, I actually put it up for the Cameron and Quinn, but I suppose it applies to any of them. Are you saying these are desired situations if you have those parameters, or are you saying those naturally arise, or are the authors saying that? Are they desired positions, or are you saying this is what happens?
So with the first two, so Cameron, Quinn, and what was the other one? So the competing values and the styles, those are diagnostic tools to use to determine what your business environment, which culture fits within or is more congruent with your business environment. And all of them have pros and cons. And so the idea behind that is to not try and develop it, because you'll find often that organizations just kind of pull issues out of thin air. Oh, we want this kind of organizational culture, but then that doesn't mesh very well with the people that you have access to a point, the skill set, the actual context of the business industry. It just doesn't work. So the tools are designed to make sure that there's harmony between what we do as an organization and our culture and the business environment. And if our culture, if an organization feels strongly about we want this culture and it's just not congruent with the business environment, then the tool helps us to determine what we can do to compensate for that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Possibly. I think you're saying that the models are saying what might be natural, and if you're not fitting that model, you might have some tension trying to manipulate it. Yeah, okay.
Correct. So it's a diagnostic tool and also something that you can use to then develop interventions.
Yeah. Okay. The other one was just a small question. You had a slide, choose a model and then choose a measure. I was just saying, well, maybe it's more than one measure. You don't have to choose just one measure, do you?
No, definitely. No, more measures is always better.
Yeah. I'm not saying you want to choose all of them, but you might have 2 or 3 rather than just one.
You can, if you've got a big people budget, you can go for all of them.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just one. Okay, thanks. That was it.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, if there are no more questions, then I think we can conclude for today. It was a very interesting hour, to say the least. So thank you, Clif. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Make sure to join.
Thank you.
The next couple of series.
See you at the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you
very much.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.